I'm I'm more of a words guy than a numbers guy, and so I've got a couple of quotes for you. I don't have very many stats for you, but I'm also quite an emotional bloke, and and I've got quite a lot of anger to share with you today. So I'm looking forward to the next 4 minutes of free therapy. So bear with me. But here's the type of anger, and I really am very angry. Um, there's a quote attributed to St. Augustine that almost definitely wasn't said by him, but it's a good quote. It says this, that hope has two beautiful daughters, one named anger and one named courage. Anger at the way that things are, and courage to see that they do not remain that way for long. So that's my anger. My anger is a manifestation of hope. My anger is a manifestation of my hope that there can be and must be change. Here's some of the other things I'm angry about. I'm angry that the election was called sooner than I've had quite enough time to prepare for. My team look after the policy and public affairs work of Christians Against Poverty, and we had a beautiful plan for an October the 17th election. I was that confident. I put 5 whole English pounds on it that I've since donated to charity. But my primary anger is on the same day as the election was called, we released our annual client report that tells the stories and shares the stats of those people who come forward to us for free debt help. And these two things they'll stick in my throat, and I want them to stick in every politician's ears. So listen carefully and then repeat them everywhere you go. Last year, 1 in 2 Christians Against Poverty clients had attempted or considered suicide before coming forward for free debt help. That was the second year in the row that that stat was true, rising from 1 in 3 the year before and 1 in 4 the year before that. People are dying to find out what politicians will do about poverty. People are putting their lives on the line to meet immediate needs in their communities, and some are running out of hope. So 1 in 2 lives are on the line, and the other stat is also 1 in 2, nice and easy to remember. 1 in 2, 1 in 2 of Christians Against Poverty clients that we helped with free debt help last year were in a deficit budget after our advice. Why is that a problem? A deficit budget is where you have not enough coming in to meet your essential outgoings as determined by a debt advisor. Now, that debt advisor isn't going to say that your fortnightly trip to Ibiza is an essential outgoing. There's no profligacy in that budget. But 1 in 2 budgets prepared by our debt advisors were in deficit by an average of £255 a month. £65 a week, the average CAP client is short of being able to cover even their essentials, even before they start paying anything towards their debts. That's totally unsustainable. And it also proves that some things are just not true. It's not true that it's a lack of financial education. If everyone in the country was educated to the same level as all of our expert debt advisors, the number would still be the same, because this is after our advice, not before. This is why we need systemic change, and we cannot do this only as a movement of social action heroes and activists. We must see the political classes join in this work and recognise that connecting the work done locally with with the national change we need to see is something that really only they can do. But we have to insist on it. All of us as voters, as leaders, as local leaders, we have to insist that poverty is put on the agenda, and that no more the difficulties that our clients are facing left to only us in charities to resolve. What do we need to happen? A couple of policy suggestions. We need income through wages to rise to at least the real living wage. No brainer. And we need social security to be reviewed and pegged against an independent panel of experts determining what would cover essential costs. No brainers. They're the two main things we want to see. But the most important thing that would mean we didn't need those policy choices right now would be for the voices of people experiencing poverty today to be listened to, believed, trusted, and acted upon. We cannot make any real lasting change if all that happens is the new government, whichever party forms it, takes on my policy ideas or your policy ideas and continues to not listen to the 14.5 million people experiencing poverty today. That's why I'm proud to support the Let's End Poverty movement. We do want to see an end to poverty. It can and must be ended, but it mustn't be ended. It can't be ended by ignoring the voices of people with experience. It will only be ended for good if we begin to listen and take those voices seriously. So that's where I stop.
I think it's really important that poverty is a key point on the agenda for the election because it can have such a massive impact on people beyond just not being able to afford things. It impacts their mental health and their physical health, and it's impacting more and more people over time. So I feel very strongly that it should be dealt with. How I think it should be dealt with, I think there's many different things that the government can be doing to try and address it. One particular way I think is important to address child poverty and also poverty impacting families is to scrap the 2-child limit. In case anyone here isn't aware of what the 2-child limit is, for universal credit, if you have children, you can get payments for each child in your household. However, in 2017, it was decided to put a limit on it and say that only 2 of your children can get those payments for them. So if you have 3 children, one of those children will not get payments. That policy is responsible for a lot of children and families being in poverty. And it was calculated that in 2023 and 2024, the cost of scrapping this policy would be £1.8 billion, and that would be the most cost-effective way to reduce child poverty. It would lift 300,000 children out of poverty, and 800,000 children would be less deep in poverty if that policy was scrapped. I think it's really important that the government commits to scrapping that policy as an important way of taking children out of poverty, because the impact on children being in poverty can be very vast and long-lasting. And then, as myself personally, I think it's really important that to address poverty, that the government keeps funding the infrastructure we do have. There's this push for more and more cuts because the government feels they don't have money to be spending on everything, but that can have such a big impact. Libraries are amazing resources, especially for those in poverty who may not be able to buy their own books. It's places where people learn to read and they get an education. For myself, that's where I studied for my theory test, so I could drive, so I could access work. And I think sometimes it's forgotten how important these public services are so important to people. And sometimes I think other things can be prioritized in funding, so they cut leisure, which libraries fall under. But I think it's really important that we don't lose everything that we do have trying to get something new. Thank you.
First of all, Gareth, thank you so much for mentioning anger, because I'm feeling especially angry at the moment, just at the lack of conversation around poverty in the election so far. So I can really relate to that. I mean, for me, I think there's 3 reasons why poverty should be, the #1 priority, and why all candidates should be talking about it at the moment. Number 1 is the absolute how completely urgent the situation has become. It's really dire and unsustainable, both for the people who need support, people who are struggling to make ends meet, and also for the frontline teams that are trying to provide support. Where we are now, we're not just talking about people running out of money at the end of the month, or kind of having less and less in their cupboards. We're talking more and more about people who have nothing, who are starving, who haven't eaten for days, children sleeping in coats, all sorts of things that are truly Dickensian, that's been getting worse kind of year after year. I really feel at the moment, we're at breaking point, and at the food bank for the last 4 years, it's just got worse and worse and worse. And just as people are feeling, more people are facing soul-destroying destitution, at the same time, donations are dwindling. Surplus food supplies are decreasing. And volunteers are under an increasing amount of pressure and mental strain, many reporting, burnout. And from my own personal experience, I ran the food bank until February this year. I had to give up because I was totally burnt out. I was at breaking point, and for my own mental health and my family, it was just enough. And now every week I speak to our own IFAN members who are going through the same thing. So for me, that's the number one reason, is really, volunteers. The voluntary sector has been taking on too much due to government policy failures, and now we've run out of road. So that's number one. That's the urgency. Number two is really that, how widely distributed this problem is now. The scale of the poverty crisis is simply enormous. I know Helen from the Trussell Trust is speaking later, and I'm sure she'll talk about their report a couple of weeks ago, that mentioned that in the last 12 months, the Trussell Trust issued 3.1 million food parcels, the highest number ever. Now, this data is shocking. However, that's only the tip of the iceberg, because alongside Trussell Trust food banks, we have thousands of independent food aid networks, food aid bank members who are also reporting the same thing. So it's really actually huge. And what also worries me is we know from our experience that visiting a food bank is the last thing people do. It's what they do when they've exhausted all other means, when they've already made all sacrifices and every conceivable change. And I always used to find it really distressing sitting down with people, hearing how long they'd struggled and suffered. So that just shows how huge the problem is. In the latest DWP family survey, they reported that 86% of families on universal credit that were struggling with severe food insecurity had not visited a food bank. So this is really a problem on a mammoth scale. The third reason why it's so pressing, and again, this is why I get so angry at the lack of conversation around this, is that actually poverty doesn't exist in isolation on its own. Poverty is linked to all of the other policy areas that are being discussed. So many of the things are linked to the dire poverty levels in the country, such as the huge health burden on the NHS, the dwindling achievement figures in education. I remember at the food bank, we would often see children who didn't go to school because the parents were too tired, too worn out or ill to take them to school. Last year, I had a family who they had two teenage boys who were doing their GCSEs, but they were sleeping on the floor. They didn't have a bed. And so I really think that, fix poverty and all of these other issues will become easier to solve and less costly. And that's why it should really be kind of the number one thing on the agenda. So they're the reasons why it's so important. What do we, IFAN, what are the specifics we want to change? Well, IFAN campaigns for the end of charitable food aid. So we campaign to end the need for food banks, and we advocate for a cash first, income-based approach to food insecurity. Specifically, there are four things that we campaign for to reduce and eliminate poverty. Trussell is making sure that social security payments are in line with the cost of living. So we 100% support the Essentials Guarantee, the brilliant campaign by the Trussell Trust and JRF, that as a bare minimum. I mean, at the food bank, we've really seen the difference that when you give people money, the difference it makes. We saw it with the £20 universal credit uplift. And we've also seen it whenever there's a cost of living payment, food bank numbers go down. People have money in their pockets. They do not need emergency food aid. So that's absolutely number one priority that we campaign for. The other issue is the things that, Kaydence just mentioned brilliantly just then, is that the social security system failings need to be tackled. There are so many policies, such as the two-child benefit, the 5-week universal credit wait, the sanctions system, the benefits cap, NRPF, all of these things need to be addressed, because currently all of these things are making the poverty crisis much, much worse. So they really need to be tackled as a matter of urgency. Then also local authority crisis support needs to be embedded in every single part of England. We were lucky in Wandsworth, and they fully embraced the Household Support Fund. And we saw that made a massive difference, because when people struggled, when they were in crisis, there was early intervention, which stopped things getting worse. So that's the third thing we campaign for that's really, really important. And the fourth is fair wages and employment practices. This needs to be looked at and a complete new way of thinking adopted. So adopting these measures would really mean that everyone in this country would have a chance of a healthy standard of living, and ultimately it'll be a fairer society. I mean, at the end of the day, giving out food parcels is not the answer. As we always say, it is like sticking on a terrible wound that keeps bleeding. You know, it's best if we want to stop that's why I think it's so brilliant that tonight's event is taking place, and thanks very much for letting us be part of this.
So we know that the benefit rates in social security have never been enough right from the very start. So whenever the government makes cuts, that's obviously just going to make a bad situation even worse. So we're now at a point where for job seekers, you don't even get enough to survive. So you get about £91 a week. And the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, who do research looking into destitution, say that you need £95 a week to avoid destitution. And some of that money that the job seekers are using to live off will also be going to top up rent and housing benefit. For sick and disabled people, it depends on whether you are treated as needing to prepare for work or not. So if you're told that you're not well enough to work, but you are well enough to prepare for work, then you get the same amount as job seekers. You're going to be destitute. There's obviously also sick and disabled people who shouldn't really be required to work, but are told that they have to, so they're put on job seekers. And then for people like me who are recognised as we're not able to work now, we're not really likely to be able to do much work in the future, we get more money, but it's still only about 60% of what is reckoned to be the minimum income standard. So that's what you need to basically enjoy life and participate in society on an equal footing. We get about 60%. We get more. Sorry, my walking stick nearly fell over. And then my dog jumped. So we get more than the essentials guarantee, but again, some of that money is topping up our rent and council tax, but also being used to top up the extra cost that we experience because of disability. And so because of all of this, disabled people, if you're in a household with a disabled person, about a third of those households are in poverty. And of all households that are in poverty, just under half include someone who is disabled. We also have research from Scope, who looked into what are the extra costs that people with disabilities experience. So this is things like I pay for a cleaner, and she also does like cooking, tidying, putting my shopping away, my mobility scooter, paying for taxis, all those sorts of things. These extra costs, Scope reckoned for a household with a disabled person is about £900 a month on top of what we get from the government. So if we are able to claim personal independence payment, which is meant to help with our extra costs, that doesn't actually really go anywhere near what we experience with having £900 on top of that ideally we would be spending on issues related to our health and disability. And this is quite contrary to some of the messaging we get at the moment. So a lot of the messaging around disability is arguing that sick and disabled people aren't as sick and disabled as we claim, that a lot of our problem is just that we think we can't work or we're too lazy to work. And if only someone would tell us that we are well enough to work or would take away all this wonderful money that we don't need, we would go out and get a job and discover that we are actually healthy. Now, that's not really worked. We've had decades of governments cutting benefits, making it harder to access benefits, making those benefits worth less in terms of how much money you get. And we've not somehow magically cured a whole load of sick and disabled people. So it's frustrating that this narrative keeps going on, like regardless of the situation, the same narrative comes out that sick and disabled people are not as sick and disabled as we claim. And sometimes it's really almost funny. It's so ludicrous. So you would have a minister might come out and say that you shouldn't get personal independence payment if all you need is a grab rail. Maybe you should just be given the grab rail and that's it. But there's no way you're going to receive personal independence payment if the only problem you have is that occasionally you have slight balance problems and you'd like a grab rail to help you get up a step or get into your bath or whatever. You can't get personal independence payment for something that mild. Or another example was they gave a hypothetical gentleman with back pain that was so severe that he had taken time off work, and he was reaching the point where he was thinking he'd never be able to go back to work. And the government suggested that if he just had 4 sessions of physiotherapy and 1 counselling session, then he'd be well enough to go back to work, which, if you know anything about pain, about health related to work, if you're at the point where you're thinking of leaving the workforce completely, you are not going to be cured by 4 physio sessions and 1 counselling session. But if that's what our politicians think that people claiming sickness and disability benefits are like, it's no wonder they keep thinking there's too many people claiming and we get too much money. But the fact is they've got zero idea of what our lives are like. And what's even more frustrating is that we've actually just had data come out from the DWP. So they periodically review a number of claimants on various different benefits to estimate how much fraud there is in the system. So the personal independence payment, they reviewed just under 1,400 people, and they found basically 0 fraud. And this is despite the fact that the idea that there is fraud in the disability benefit system and needing to target fraud in order to be able to give genuine cases more money is quite a popular theme amongst ministers. And yet we've just found out there's 0 fraud. And they've not come out celebrating this, going, look, there's 0 fraud. We don't have to worry about it. We can give disabled people more money after all. Maybe we can stop being so stingy and start being a bit more generous. They've not said that. So it's really frustrating that for decades, the mantra we get from politicians is that we're not that sick, we're not that disabled. If only we were given less money, we would go back to work and we would stop claiming extra cost benefits. And it's just not true at all. A lot of the people I know, and I should really include myself in this, need to be restrained from work because we want so much to be part of society. We want to contribute to society. We want to be involved in the lives of our friends and family, but this just makes us more ill, and trying to deal with the frustration of that is really hard. And so we will keep engaging in activity that's beyond our limits, and we need governments that can recognise that rather than going, actually, do you know what, maybe you should go out and get a job and make yourself seriously ill. I will pause at that point. So for things that should change, I think one of the things that we really need is that universal credit for sick and disabled people should be matched to the state pension. There's no real reason why someone who is basically on sickness pension in other countries, you would have an actual pension for people who are too sick to work. There's no real reason why that should be less than if you've left work because of age. So that should be set to the same level. And then whenever they increase state pension, that would automatically increase the support for sick and disabled people. We know the assessment process needs to change, but that's a really big topic that needs massive exploration. And then personal independence payment also needs to be increased. And we need a government that can, am I allowed to say that? We need a government that can commit to providing cash, because cash is really helpful. Like I pay my cleaner, I buy my mobility scooters usually secondhand just from someone who's selling theirs. I buy new batteries for it from just a generic battery. I don't buy specific ones for mobility scooters because they're more expensive. So various suggestions that we should be using vouchers to pay for these things or a catalogue system just don't work, because my cleaner's not on a catalogue and she doesn't want to be paid in DWP vouchers. They're of no use to her. Whereas cash means that we can use the money for absolutely anything. We can be incredibly flexible. It's very tailored. It's nowhere near as expensive as trying to run any other mechanism for awarding people support for their disability. So PIP needs to be more generous, not less, and we need a commitment that it will stay cash-based.
I'm really pleased to be speaking here, and I'm really pleased to be sharing with you tonight. Normally in webinars, I'm the angry person who talks about poverty, and I'm just deeply outclassed here. There are people here who share and magnify that anger, because poverty is something we should be angry about. And I was reminded of, actually listening to Kaydence, I was reminded of being at a mother and toddler group in a church in South London. And I gave my spiel about universal credit, as you do, and then I was quiet because they knew what they were wanted to talk about, and I really wasn't needed. And I sat on the floor, and I had on one knee a child who was a second child, who the benefit system cared about. And I had on the other knee a child who was a third child, who the benefit system didn't care about, who the benefit system said, you are not getting any support. And that seemed like such a horrendous injustice. They didn't look different. One of them wasn't working harder than the other. They were just babies, and they deserved support, and they weren't getting it. So I was asked why I wanted poverty to be the heart of the general election campaign, and given 5 minutes, and you don't need 5 minutes for that. In March, statistics were published that said 1 in 10 families in the United Kingdom is food insecure, regularly worries about whether or not they will have enough food. That is not the country most people think they are living in. That is certainly not the country I want to live in. And it is not the country we need to live in. With political will, it can change. And it is a choice that we live in a country where people regularly go without food. And one of the things that I wanted to share was that the last decade has been deeply traumatic, and we've heard some of it. Stef talked about the process of welfare reform, which was really traumatic on lots of people and left them in a difficult and fragile place. We have had austerity, and we have had a pandemic, and as Charlotte has said, people are absolutely rocking. Communities are rocking. And this election, and over the next year or two, we're going to start defining what the new normal is. Should not be normal. This level of poverty, this level of hardship should not be normal. And my real fear is that if we don't talk about poverty at this election campaign, and we don't continue talking about poverty over the next year or two, what we see today will be viewed as normal. And it is absolutely not. And I wanted to sort of finish by just sharing a story that when I started this work sort of 15 years ago, it was at the heart of the striver or skiver rhetoric, where people who experienced poverty were being blamed. And that there was this instinct to blame people for their own poverty and their own suffering. And I never understood why people were keen to believe it, because it met with people who wanted to believe it. And as I've done this work, and I think I have a different experience from Charlotte of food banks, because I'm not working in one day to day, I get to dip in and out. And I've always loved being in a food bank. I've always loved the stories and the camaraderie and the conversation. And I've loved in the church projects that I've visited. And the hardest part for me in the day is when I go back to my own fridge and I open it up. And it's psychologically protective to say, the reason why I'm in this nice place and they aren't is they're worse than me. And people want to believe that. And the other response is to completely ignore it and deny that the poverty is there. And I think at this election, that's what's happening, is that people are trying to deny that the poverty is there. But the only just response is to look it in the eye and to say that this is just injustice. and is needless injustice. It does not have to be this way. And then start addressing the issue. And everybody else has ended with what needs to change. And I don't want to give a list of policies. There are other people who've done that and they have done it well. What needs to change is that people who experience poverty need to be viewed as partners in challenging poverty. Their expertise needs to be listened to and understood and used as part of the way out of this mess. And what needs to change is that the people who we meet in food banks and in church projects and all of those need to be respected. And when they're respected and listened to, we will start making progress in all the other policy areas. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Sitting listening to what people are saying so far makes me feel proud to be part of what we're doing. This isn't written down, by the way, Hannah. I have to write things down. And together, you know, the passion that's been shown is amazing. For me, what our leaders need to understand is that people are the lifeblood of this country. And given the help they need can make a huge difference. Those people struggling against poverty often go unseen and their skills are ignored. We have food banks that provide an amazing service, but are masking the scale of those in poverty. They are not being seen starving on the streets, so they don't exist. And I totally agree, we should not need food banks in a civilized country. And I know that for ourselves in our area, this is what we're working towards, not being there, not having to provide this service. The poverty crisis has been going on far too long. And the way to stop it is to begin to listen to those people who are struggling against poverty every day of their lives. And change comes down to finding out what people want and not giving them what you think they want. As Hannah said, I've been involved in working with Cheshire West from the Poverty Truth Commission launched in 2017. Following on from our second commission, we have created the Poverty Truth Advisory Board, where the council works with a group of commissioners who we call ourselves inspirers. And it's to test out proposals to tackle poverty within the council. We also work closely with civic and business leaders to achieve the same goals. This way of working in co-production takes courage, and courage from all sides. If you're struggling with poverty, the courage to get involved is key. To trust when you share your realities that you won't be victimized. The courage of mothers who are scared that if they admit that they can't cope, they will feel that they'll have their children taken from them. And the courage of disabled people and the elderly to ask if there are any other benefits that they're entitled to, without the fear of losing what they already have. But the biggest courage is needed by the people that make the decisions. Council and councillors, civic leaders and politicians, they need to admit that they don't always get things right. And the courage for us all, is to act together to help the people most vulnerable. One of the examples that we have as a network has been to draw up a charter around access to services, how to access what we need and where to access them. Because this is one of the biggest things that prevents people from getting what they're entitled to. And that is one of the things that this government, any government, not being political, any government, our government, they should be made to inform everybody of what they're entitled to. We shouldn't have to search for everything. We shouldn't have to be afraid to ask. It should be there. If we're entitled to it, we should get it. It shouldn't be, well, you know, if you go looking, you can find it and you can have it. And our work now within the network is to champion this charter and to encourage as many people as possible throughout the country who make those decisions to accept it. And I want a government that has the courage to actually listen to people in poverty and to make the changes to improve people's lives. The mantra of the Poverty Truth Commissions is, nothing about us without us is for us, and nothing can be closer to the truth. You can't make decisions if you don't know the story, you don't know what we need. And for me, I will finish there.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for being here tonight. With Gareth talking about anger, and I think that's great because things don't change without anger. But I wanted to end by talking about hope, because I think that's the other thing we need if we're going to achieve real change. And I have 3 reasons to hope for us to leave here with tonight. So the first one is, this is a problem we understand really, really well. There are lots of big problems that we don't actually know very much about. We don't know how to fix them. This isn't one of those. Actually, we have very good research that many people here have done. So we understand how many people are having to go without essentials, they're going hungry. We know what kinds of people are most effective. So we know that disabled people and families with children, for instance, are disproportionately affected by this. And we understand the drivers. We actually know why people get left in this situation. We know it's about inadequate social security and insecure work and rents that are too high and services that are too hard to access. We know all of this stuff. And we've heard from everyone tonight. Everyone can easily reach for, here's a solution. And we have a Trussell Trust manifesto. You can search for it. We've pulled out our top 10 solutions. There are a lot more. So I think that's the first thing. We do know how to fix this. And if we look back over the last 20 years, say, you can see every government of every stripe has taken some action which has helped. Now, they've done lots of other things which haven't helped, but every single parliament, you can point to things which have made a difference. And in some cases, you can see really big falls in poverty among pensioners, say. So we know what this is, we know how to fix it, we know it can be fixed. That's my first reason for hope. My second reason is actually thinking about politicians. Now, I know trust in politicians is at an all-time low, and we all know why. But actually, I think there are politicians in every party and at every point in the political spectrum who really do care about this stuff. They may or may not agree with any of our solutions, but there are people who genuinely care and want to make a difference for their communities. So in every community, in every party, there are people we can be connecting with. And in an election campaign, they're really listening. I mean, you might not realise it, but my God, they're listening to what people tell them during this period of time. So this is the time to actually be saying to candidates, this is what we care about. So I think others here will be doing the same. At Trussell, we have a pledge we're asking candidates to take so that if they are elected, they will use their voice to call for changes that will mean that people don't need to rely on food banks. Others will be doing the same. This is the time to be really getting hold of your local candidates and telling them this is what we care about. And my third reason for hope is actually the public. It's all of us, because we've done research with the public And what we found is that the vast majority, more than 7 in 10, agree poverty is a big problem. They think it's the government's job to step up and fix it. They don't think food banks should need to exist. So we actually have a really big majority of the public who are on board with this. The gap we've got is between the public and what kind of gets to the top of the political agenda when everything else is competing, which is where people power comes in. If enough of us raise this, it will get onto the agenda. So those are my 3 reasons for hope. The only other thing that I wanted to say is this is going to be a long haul. So a lot of us have been trying to do this for a long time already. A lot of people are quite tired, actually. When I talk to our food banks, when I talk to some of you, people are tired. But we need to really be able to stick in it, because whatever happens in the election, we're going to need to keep pushing all the way through to get progress. It's going to be a long haul for us. So I suppose my last thing is to say, as a community of people who care about this, we need to reach out to each other as well. We need to make sure we are supporting each other, that none of us feel on our own with this, because we all need to keep going over the next few years to win. Every small win takes us closer to a position where, as Charlotte said, as Barbara said, as we would always say, we can close down, we can close food banks, and all those volunteers can do the other things they could be doing in their communities, because people don't need emergency food, because they have enough money to afford the essentials with dignity. And that's something I genuinely believe we can achieve, but it's going to take some time. So I think my last point is, let's dig in and make sure we keep going with this. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here, because this is a source of hope in itself that we're all spending our evenings doing this. So thank you very much, and over to you, Hannah.